ever looked at a 10-year-old and thought, you know what this kid needs? A Kevlar vest and a front row seat to a fist fight with a clown who smells like garbage and chemical weapons? If you answered yes, please stay away from schools, but also congratulations. You have the exact same brain as a Golden Age comic book editor. We are diving deep into the weird, wonderful, and quite honestly concerning world of comic book child soldiers. It's a trope that has defined Marvel and DC for decades, turning what should be a call to Child Protective Services into some of the most profitable and beloved stories in human history. Originally, these kids were just there so little Timmy in 1940 could imagine himself punching a Nazi without actually having to deal with the mud, the lice, or the looming existential dread of the infantry. I'm calling them the surrogates, aka legalized kidnapping for the sake of relatability, but as the writers got older and probably started going to therapy, they realized that taking an orphan and teaching them how to break a man's windpipe before he can even grow a mustache is actually pretty messed up. Thus, the sidekick evolved to the child soldier, and the stories went from, gosh, Batman, to my childhood was a localized apocalypse. We love these characters because they are the ultimate survivors. They take the absolute worst case scenario, which is being weaponized by the people who were supposed to protect them, and they somehow came out the other side as heroes. It is the most extreme version of "it gets better" ever put to paper. Plus, it makes our own childhood traumas, like that time your mom bought the generic brand cereal, seem a lot more manageable. If a kid who was literally raised in a hell dimension can make it work, you could probably handle your 9 to 5 without a mental breakdown. Now, let's look at some of the examples of child soldiers in comics that we love. Dick Grayson. If we're talking about the pioneer of the put a child in a brightly colored target suit movement, we have to start with Dick Grayson. Batman saw a grieving orphan whose parents just plummeted to their deaths and decided the best way to process that grief was through intense gymnastics and urban warfare. Instead of a teddy bear and a warm glass of milk, Dick got a green Speedo and a direct line to the Gotham City Police Department's most wanted list. It is the kind of parenting that would get you a Netflix documentary today, but in 1940, it was just Tuesday. I think what makes Dick Grayson so magnetic is that he is basically the only person in the entire DC universe who survived a mentorship with Batman without becoming a total shut-in who talks to gargoyles. He took all that trauma, the night spent tracking serial killers, and the constant threat of being crowbarred by a psychopath, and he decided to stay a nice guy. That's why I have him as the gold standard for resilience. But the best part is when he finally traded the Robin booties for the Nightwing suit, because it was more than just a fashion choice. It was a declaration of independence from a billionaire who definitely should have been paying for his college instead of his smoke pellets. On top of all that, he is the emotional glue of the superhero community. Everyone loves Dick. Even the people who hate everything else like Deathstroke still think Dick is a pretty solid dude. He proves that you can be raised by a man who thinks shadows are his best friends and still grow up to have a functional social life and a very impressive set of glutes. The craziest thing out of all of this is that he did all of this while wearing a costume that was basically a neon sign saying, "Shoot the child." He survived the gauntlet of Gotham's worst villains while essentially dressed as a tropical bird, and he did it with a smile. That kind of mental fortitude is either inspiring or a sign of a very specific kind of madness that we just happen to find charming. With this, he is the blueprint for every kid who ever had to grow up too fast and decided to be a beacon of light instead of a grumpy man in a cave. At the end of the day, Dick Grayson is the guy you want at your birthday party and the guy you want leading you into a cosmic war. He managed to escape the gravity of Batman's obsession and carve out a legacy that is arguably more impressive than the Dark Knight's himself. That's because he took a stolen childhood and turned it into a masterpiece of self-actualization, which is honestly a lot of work for someone who started his career in a circus. Bucky Barnes. Imagine being a teenager in the 1940s, excited to fight for your country, only to find out your job description involves doing all the murders that Captain America is too polite to handle. Bucky Barnes was the original sprightly sidekick, but modern writers like Ed Brubaker pulled back the curtain to reveal something much darker. While Steve Rogers was out being the shining symbol of American virtue and doing press tours, Bucky was in the bushes making sure the people Steve didn't want to kill stayed dead. He was basically the designated Black Ops teenager, which is a job title I definitely think should not exist in any functioning society. Then, things got worse, because in comics, worse is the only direction things go. That's because he died in an explosion, only to be scooped up by the Soviets and given a metal arm and turned into the Winter Soldier. He then spent decades as a human popsicle, thought out only to delete high-profile targets before being shoved back into the freezer. He wasn't just a child soldier. He was a reusable weapon with a very tragic backstory. By the time he got his memories back, his permanent record was basically just a list of international war crimes committed while he was a literal puppet. The reason Bucky is so compelling for me is the sheer weight of his guilt. He remembers everything. Every person he took out while he was brainwashed as a ghost that follows him around. That's why his struggle isn't just about fighting bad guys. It's about trying to convince himself that he's not a bad guy too. I like to imagine it as a raw, agonizing look at what happens when you turn a human being into a tool and then expect them to just be a person once again the war is over. On top of his traumatic resume, Bucky has to deal with the fact that his best friend is a living legend who looks at him with nothing but pity and hope. I genuinely think that it is a lot of pressure. Furthermore, he's the guy who has to balance the scales of a ledger that is dripping in red ink, and while he does it with a cybernetic arm and a permanent scowl. We root for him because his redemption feels earned. It isn't a quick fix, it's a grueling lifelong marathon of trying to be better than the things he was forced to do. That's why I feel like Bucky's story is the ultimate fixer-upper narrative of the Marvel Universe. He was broken in every way a person can be broken, physically, mentally, and spiritually, and he's still trying to put the pieces back together. It's a messy, violent, and deeply human journey that reminds us that even if your past is a horror movie, you can still try to write a sequel that's a little more heroic. Cassandra Crane. If you think your parents were strict, just remember that Cassandra Crane's dad literally refused to teach her how to talk because he wanted her to be a better assassin. David Crane decided that spoken language was just clutter that would slow down her reflexes. Hence why he raised her in total silence, teaching her to read muscle twitches and micro-expressions like they were the morning news. Because of this, she could predict a punch before a guy even thought about throwing it, but she couldn't ask for a sandwich. It's the kind of specialized upbringing that only happens in comic books or really weird private schools. The turning point for Cassandra was when she finally killed someone at age 8 and read the life leaving their body. Because violence was her only language, she felt the full weight of the death she caused in a way no other character ever has. She didn't just see it, she understood it as a conversation. That trauma sent her running away from her father and straight into the arms of the Bat family, where she became Batgirl. This is when she took the ultimate tool of destruction, aka herself, and tried to turn it into a shield for the innocent. What makes Cassandra so fascinating is her internal struggle, and honestly, this is one of the topics that I love to read in comics. She's the most dangerous person in a room full of dangerous people, but she's also the most terrified one of hurting anyone. This contrast is so interesting to me because she has to constantly police her own reflexes. So every time she fights, she is fighting her own nature and the way she was programmed by her sociopathic father. Her journey isn't just about learning to speak English, it's about learning that she's allowed to have feelings that aren't kill or don't kill. On top of the whole weapon of mass destruction thing, Cassandra is a character who communicates through movement. In the medium filled with word bubbles, she stands out by being the one who doesn't need them. You see her pain and her growth in a way she understands and the way she strikes. If I'm being real, watching her slowly learn to trust people and form actual friendships is like watching a robot slowly realize it has a heart. It's deeply moving, mostly because you know she could kill everyone in the room with a paperclip if she really wanted to. In the end, I feel like Cassandra Cain is a testament to the idea that our upbringing doesn't have to be our destiny. She was designed to be the perfect silent killer, and she chose to be a hero who struggles with her own power every single day. She is a reminder that even if you were raised by a monster, you can still choose to be the person who stops monsters. Laura Kinney. Meet Laura Kinney, the girl who was literally grown in a lab because some scientists decided Wolverine wasn't stabby enough. She is a clone of Logan, but with a childhood that makes his look like a summer camp. That's because they poisoned her with radiation to kickstart her healing factor, ripped her claws out to coat them in metal without any painkillers, and worst of all, in my opinion, conditioned her with a trigger scent that turns her into a mindless murder machine. She didn't have a childhood. She had a manufacturing process. What makes Laura's appeal so visceral to me is how she handles the aftermath of all that abuse. When she finally escaped, she didn't just join a superhero team and start cracking jokes because she was just a total mess. She struggled with self-harm and a total lack of self-worth because for her entire life, she had been told she was just a thing. She is the child soldier as a survivor of extreme medical and psychological abuse. Her early stories are dark, gritty, and honestly quite difficult to read because they feel so real despite the bone claws and healing factors. As she grew, she didn't just stay a female Wolverine. She became her own person. What I love the most is when she took on the mantle of Wolverine not to copy Logan, but to honor the man who became the father she never had. But probably even better is that her relationship with the X-Men is her way of building a family from scratch, choosing people who see her as a human rather than a biological weapon. And this might sound crazy, but I genuinely think that she manages to be more emotionally mature than Logan half the time, which, granted, isn't a very high bar to clear. Laura's journey is about reclaiming her body. For years, her body was a lab experiment and a tool for others to use. That's why watching her take control of her own life and decide how to use her powers is a powerful metaphor for anyone who has ever felt like they didn't have a say in their own existence. She isn't just a clone. She's a person who fought her way out of a test tube and into a life worth living. She reminds us that even if you were made for one thing, you can decide to be something else entirely. By reading her comics, you see how she turned her claws from tools of assassination into tools of protection. And she did it while carrying more trauma than a whole season of Stranger Things. Damian Wayne. Damian Wayne is what happens when you combine the world's greatest detective with the world's most dangerous eco-terrorist and then let a league of assassins do the homeschooling. He didn't just join the war, he was born into it. Genetically perfected in an artificial womb and taught how to kill a man with a blade before he could ride a bike. When he first showed up at Wayne Manor, he wasn't looking for a hug. He was looking for a fight. Worst of all, he viewed his father's no-killing rule as a cute little hobby and thought he was the rightful heir to the entire planet. The appeal of Damian is that he's a total jerk, but I think for a very understandable reason. First off, he was raised to be a conqueror. Every bit of his arrogance is a defense mechanism for a 10-year-old who has never known unconditional love. I like to think that his struggle is the ultimate nature versus nurture experiment. That's because he has the DNA of a hero and a villain, and his entire life is a tug of war between those two sides. Watching him slowly, and I mean very slowly, learn how to be a normal kid is both hilarious and heartbreaking. Even more interesting to me is how he interacts with the other Robins. He treats them like annoying step-siblings that he also happens to be able to beat in a sword fight. But beneath all that, I am the son of the bat posturing. He's just a kid who desperately wants his dad to be proud of him. His redemption isn't about some grand epiphany. It's about a million small choices to be slightly less of a sociopath every single day. But the most important of all, I genuinely believe Damian's growth is one of the most rewarding arcs in modern comics. That's because he went from a character that fans genuinely hated to one of the most beloved members of the Bat family. We root for him because we see how hard he has to fight his own instincts to do the right thing. He's the child soldier who has given the keys to the kingdom of darkness and decided he'd rather stay in the messy, complicated light with his weird family. In the end, he's the living proof that you can be raised by a literal death cult and still end up caring about a pet cow and a dorky kid with heat vision. Also, his journey is a testament to the power of a semi-functional family and the fact that even the most entitled brat can learn the value of a human life. Ilyana Rasputina. If you think your middle school years were a nightmare, Ilana Rasputina spent hers literally in hell. She was kidnapped as a child and was taken to the dimension of limbo, where time moves differently. By the time the X-Men rescued her, only seconds had passed for them, but she had spent 7 years being tortured and trained by dark magic, by a demon lord named Belasco. She went in as a sweet little girl and came out as a hardened warrior with a soul sword and a demonic alter ego called Dark Child. It's probably the worst stolen childhood story dialed up to 11. Oyana's appeal is all about the duality of her soul. She is constantly fighting the corruption that Belasco planted inside her. Everyone knows she's a hero, but she's a hero who uses the weapons of the enemy to do her job. She's the Sorcerer Supreme of a Hell Dimension, which is a pretty intense side hustle for a teenager. What I think makes her so compelling is her refusal to be a victim. She took the trauma that was supposed to destroy her and used it to overthrow her abuser and take over his kingdom. The craziest part, on top of the magical demons and teleportation discs, Illyana is the character who feels tainted. That's because she often struggles with the idea that she's too broken for the people who love her, like her brother Colossus. Her story is a powerful metaphor for surviving profound abuse and the feeling that you've lost something that can never be replaced. But she doesn't let that stop her. She is fierce, she is loyal, and she's absolutely terrifying when she needs to be. Watching her navigate the world of the X-Men while carrying the literal weight of hell on her shoulders is fascinating in all kinds of ways. She doesn't fit in, and she knows it, but she makes herself indispensable anyway. She's the child soldier who doesn't just survive the war, she became the commander of the battlefield. Her journey is about taking your darkest parts and making them work for you rather than letting them consume you. For Oyana, even if you've been through hell, literally, you can still come back and be the person who makes sure no one else has to go there. Jason Todd. If Dick Grayson is the success story that makes Batman look like a parenting genius, Jason Todd is the cautionary tale that reminds us why putting a middle schooler in a Kevlar vest is a legal nightmare. Jason was a street kid caught trying to boost the tires off the Batmobile. Instead of calling social services, Bruce Wayne decided the boy's anger would be better utilized by teaching him how to dropkick drug dealers. It was a bold strategy that ended with a crowbar and a warehouse full of explosives courtesy of the Joker. But I think the real allure of Jason Todd is that he is the child soldier who actually died on the job. For decades, he was just a trophy in a glass case, a permanent stain on Batman's conscience. But when he was resurrected via some very convenient supernatural bathwater, aka Lazarus Pit, he didn't come back as a smiling sidekick. He came back as the Red Hood, a lethal vigilante who decided that Batman's no-kill rule was the reason Gotham was still a dumpster fire. He's the child soldier who looked at his commander and said, "Your way doesn't work, and also, you let my murderer live, so we're done here." But perhaps what I find the most interesting is the unadulterated petty energy Jason brings to the family dynamic. He's the black sheep who shows up to Thanksgiving just to remind everyone that he was literally murdered because of their hobby. That's why I think his struggle is deeply relatable to anyone who's ever felt betrayed by a mentor or a parent. He isn't just a villain. He's a victim who decided that being a victim was boring and being a gunslinging anti-hero was much more cathartic. Watching Jason navigate his relationship with the Bat family is like watching a slow-motion car crash that somehow keeps winning races. That's because he oscillates between trying to earn Bruce's approval and trying to blow up Bruce's car. I like to call him the raw, bleeding heart of the sidekick trope, showing the dark reality of what happens when the mission fails. We love him because he's the only one honest enough to point out that their entire lifestyle is completely insane. He took the trauma of his own death and turned it into a crusade that challenges the morality of the heroes we worship. Not every child soldier comes home with a medal. Some come home with a grudge and enough ammunition to start a small war. Nothing says Happy Father's Day like your resurrected son trying to headshot your arch nemesis in front of you. Billy Batson. Imagine being a homeless 10-year-old living in a subway station, and a glowing wizard tells you that by shouting a magic word, you could turn into a 250-pound adult with the power of 6 different gods. Last on the roster, we have Billy Batson, which is the most literal interpretation of the child soldier trope, because he doesn't just act like an adult soldier, he physically becomes one. He's the kid playing at being a hero in a body that could juggle planets. It's the most unique power fantasy wrapped in a heartbreaking reality of a boy who just wants a warm place to sleep. The appeal of Billy, or Shazam, is the massive gap between the divine power and his 8th grade maturity level. Firstly, he's essentially a child soldier drafted by a wizard into a magical war he didn't even know existed. He has the wisdom of Solomon, but he's still a kid who thinks staying up past 10 is a victory. This creates a fascinating tension where the world's most powerful being is also someone who probably still gets excited about a new video game release. On top of the god-tier powers, Billy's story is a profound look at the burden of responsibility. That's because he has to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders while he's still trying to figure out how to navigate the foster care system. Unlike the other child soldiers, he doesn't have a billionaire mentor or a super soldier serum. He just has a word and his own internal compass. What I love the most about him is that despite having the power to rule the world, he remains one of the kindest, most innocent characters in the DC universe. His narrative resonates because it's about the purity of a child's heart being tested by absolute power. Most people would become tyrants if they could fly and throw lightning, but Billy just wants to help his friends and find a family. He's the child soldier who was given the ultimate weapon and decided to use it to be the world's biggest, strongest, nice guy. Which is exactly why being a hero isn't about how big your muscles are, but about how big your heart is. He's the kid who was forced to grow up instantly, but refused to let go of the wonder and empathy that makes being a kid great. I'm thinking of him as a literal personification of growing up too fast, and he does it with more grace than most adults in the Kardashian family. So why are we so obsessed with these stories of weaponized toddlers and traumatized teens? I think first and foremost, they're just great drama. There's something inherently high stakes about a character who has to learn how to save the world before they've even learned how to drive a car. But more than that, these characters are metaphors for the universal experience of growing up. We all feel like we're being pushed into roles we didn't choose, and we all have to figure out how to be real people while dealing with the baggage of our parents and society dumped on us. These child soldiers are the extreme version of that struggle. They are the ultimate underdogs because they are fighting for their own souls while also fighting cosmic threats. On top of that, they give us a way to process trauma and resilience in a way that feels epic and meaningful. When we see Dick Grayson smile or Bucky Barnes find a moment of peace, it feels like a victory for everyone who has ever had a rough start in life. The appeal isn't what we want to see kids in danger. It's that we want to see them overcome it. We want to believe that no matter how much someone tries to turn us into a tool or a weapon, we still have the agency to choose who we want to be. These characters are the broken children who decided to heal themselves by fixing a broken world, and that is a story that never gets old. These children show that you could survive the worst things imaginable and still find a way to be a hero, or at least a person who doesn't punch people for no reason. In the end, these stories resonate because they are about hope in the face of total darkness. They take the messiest, most uncomfortable parts of the human experience and turn them into something mythic and inspiring. Remember, our past doesn't have to be our prison, even if that past involved a lot of explosions and sweaty spandex. At least if your childhood was a disaster, you didn't have to do it while wearing a cape that gets caught into everything. Well, that's it for this one. If you liked the video, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and ring the bell so you never miss a drop. Craving more stories from comics, movies, and beyond? Check out this video right here. Cheers and see you in the next one.